Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for January 14, 2024. Today we're talking with Karen Vrtanesyan. Hello Karen, welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Ողջույն. Well, traditionally, New Year's Eve is one of the most popular holidays in Armenia and the former Soviet Union. The vast majority of people ring in the new year at home with family and friends. But this year, on December 31st, the two of you, Hovik and Karen, and many others were on the streets of Yerevan. And by that, I don't mean Republic Square with the big Christmas tree and the countdown clock and big crowds. Can you tell us what was the purpose of this event and why was it important?
Okay, I would ask Hovik to tell why he joined that, let's say, abnormal New Year Eve celebration, as we call it. Because the normal was that you stay at home with your relatives, with your family. You put a great table there with great food, etc., etc. But this time we decided to break that cycle. And honestly, it's interesting to me to note why Hovik joined us.
Well, I was asking myself the question of what is there to celebrate, even before I learned about this event. And what is there to celebrate? Armenians lost another chunk of our homeland that, unlike many other regions in Armenia, had been inhabited by Armenians uninterrupted for millennia until 2023. We lost hundreds of lives in the fighting of over just a few days. We lost hundreds of people in the gas storage explosion, which was also caused by the Azerbaijani attack and the chaos that ensued afterwards. We lost 70 people just on the exodus from Artsakh that followed. Many Artsakh families in Armenia don't have a permanent residence. Many Artsakhtsis in Armenia don't know whether they should leave, emigrate out. And to top it all off, what may come in 2024 may be much more dangerous. So when I see that the government is trying to, make us forget, like we're some animals without memory, and just, celebrate, just forget the impending danger that is all around us, this event was a good counteraction to the government's overt efforts to basically keep us sedated. Last year, for instance, and many Armenians nowadays, after the 2020 war, go to Yerevan on New Year's Eve, especially those that know someone who perished during the 2020 war and subsequently. And I did so last year, but this year I decided to join this event. And I'm not against modest commemoration with family, but didn't feel like lighting fireworks, watching fireworks, drinking champagne, or anything like that. I felt great being in the company of people who felt the same way. And yeah, even though there were about 50 people at the event, there were thousands watching live, and I believe tens of thousands in the end watched our event on YouTube alone. So the event was impactful more than just the number of people who were present.
I'm sure that there was a good feeling of camaraderie and bonding at that event. What was people's reaction? What was the takeaway from that event?
I would say, first of all, it was some sort of satisfaction that you showed your disagreement with what was going on in Armenia. Because all that over-killing celebrations, millions of dollars spent on New Year celebrations, on Christmas tree in the center of Yerevan, on holiday lighting, etc., etc. And that's, of course, not normal, and not only because of the losses, which very important reason on its own, but also because of the threats that are real, and there is huge probability that the year 2024 is going to be another year with new losses, with more attacks from Azerbaijan. So when you celebrate it in such a crazy way, I mean, it's not normal. It's about trying to calm people down in the face of impending calamity. That's why I think it was very important to show some sort of, public disagreement, to break away from this normalcy that is being imposed upon Armenians, being imposed by the government.
Yeah.
Not a single day since the genocide in Artsakh, and it's not Armenians that say that it's a genocide. Recently, the director of Lemkin Institute, that institute, in an interview, she said that this wasn't even a, how you call it, forceful eviction, displacement. What happened in Artsakh actually was a case of genocide. And they are specializing in genocides, in researching genocide, in warning about genocide. So what she said, that what happened in Artsakh was a genocide. Still, there wasn't not a single day. There wasn't a national mourning in Armenia declared, and they tried to move on like nothing special happened.
Karen, I think this is an important point you are making about this illusion of normalcy, and the Lemkin Institute and others actually saying that this is genocide. If anything, the Armenian government seems to have steered clear of that narrative. Can you talk a little bit, being a strong follower of the Armenian media, what are the narratives that are being sponsored and propagated by the media to pretend like everything is okay and not allow Armenians to, in general, to mourn and understand the kind of disaster we're living through?
First, they tried. I mean, the very first days, yeah, there were of course reports of the attack, but the days after, they mostly focused on showing how Armenians from Artsakh are being greeted in Armenia. And actually, the shock was so much. It was a huge shock for many people. Many people went on to help the refugees from Artsakh, the forcefully displaced persons, and the abnormality of what was happening. It was sort of, La Roswell, how you would say it.
Smeared.
Yeah, it was smeared. And I mean, people started to discuss, to argue about what opposition does to help refugees, as if, why should the opposition be the main target of such an inquiry? Because what happened was done actually by the government of Armenia. And it's very interesting how Nikol Pashinyan's government, they did everything, first of all, not to allow Armenians from Karabakh to gather in one place. They actively, the first thing they did, they started to send people from Artsakh to different faraway regions of Armenia.
Yeah, they segmented the population into,
Yes, they segmented because they knew quite well it's going to be huge discontent by these people. They are not going to be pleased, and maybe they can pose a problem for Nikol Pashinyan's government. So there were lots of hardships were even artificially created for them.
Mm-hmm.
Another very interesting thing, for example, government enforced attacks for people who are giving their property for lease. And I mean, there was always attacks, but they decided right now, when there are many Artsakhtsis in Armenia, looking for affordable housing, and they imposed some taxes for the property owners. So they had to pass these additional costs onto the tenants. And of course, they are saying that, oh, this was planned, this was nothing extraordinary, etc., etc. But if you have over 100,000 people in their need of affordable housing, people who left everything they had, why are you enforcing steps that would make that housing even more expensive? And there are lots of things like this. For example, another very weird policy was that actually Nikol Pashinyan decided to strip Artsakh Armenians from the Armenian citizenship.
Right.
They didn't put it in a straight way, but they said that the government of Armenia is declaring about, they said that they make it easier to get refugee status for Artsakhtsis, but actually what they did, they started taking away their passports, claiming that these passports never meant that its holders had Armenian citizenship. And actually, these people are now stripped of Armenian citizenship, which is absurd because before 2023, when they came to Armenia, they got all the, I mean, they have had all the rights of Armenian citizens, and they even took part in Armenian elections.
Famous examples of that being Armen Grigoryan, and General Staff of Armenia is someone from Artsakh. So how are these people not citizens of Armenia but occupying government positions?
Very sensitive government positions with access to confidential and top secret information.
Yeah. So and the public narrative, it's important because the public narrative, what you heard on Channel 1 was, if you want to get a refugee status, then just sign this application. Then the fine print in the application says that, I recognize I'm not a citizen of any other country. And by the way, just that application itself means that you are not a citizen of Armenia either. So, remarkably, the public narrative was not about Artsakhtsis being stripped of citizenship as much as, if you want to get aid easier, then you should fill out this application.
In addition to all of these logistical concerns, I'm very concerned about the gerrymandering and segregating of the population, the 100,000, 50 here, 100 there, 1,000 here, because these people, these Artsakhtsis will end up assimilating in the communities that they've been placed in and start losing their Artsakhtsi character, which is part and parcel of keeping these folks who they are, and it contributes to the ongoing genocide, essentially. So Armenia, in my view, is contributing to this problem.
Gerrymandering is a very correct description of what was the government of Armenia doing, because it is obvious that this is done for political reasons, not to allow Artsakhtsis to take part in any election, any coming election, be that local or national. And by actually stripping them of Armenian citizenship, which is totally illegal, it's anti-constitutional. No one can strip an Armenian citizen of Armenian citizenship. But this is what they do. And I think that's the main reason for that is that Nikol Pashinyan doesn't want Artsakhtsi voters to vote during the national elections. So gerrymandering is the exact correct word of what they were doing.
Okay, let's move on to a slightly different topic. Over the past month, there have been several prominent court cases that Western ambassadors and analysts apparently have no idea about. These are the same ones who, after the mass uprisings in 2008, were continuously criticizing Armenia of how prisoners were handled, how detainees were handled. So the two cases that I wanted to focus on was Avetik Chalabian's sentence, which was issued towards the end of December. And basically, there was no jail time, but one of his main sentences was that he will be deprived from political activity. He will not organize and he will not protest he will not participate in any protests for 2 years or more, I think. And we all remember that before Chalabian's verdict, he was detained for many months. And this is a common, it seems this is a common sub-theme whenever an opposition-related person is arrested. He is immediately detained for many months, or he or she, and the fear expressed by the government is that they may interfere in their own case. The other trial, of course, is Armenia-Azerbaijan's trial, and we know that the court issued an extension of his detention by another 3 months. So many people see Ashotyan as one of the front runners in potentially challenging Pashinyan. Karen, you're active in talking about political prisoners and cases of judicial harassment in Armenia. Your friends have recently started the Armenian Center for Political Rights, and that center has already issued a statement about Avetik Chalabian's case specifically. What is your thought on whether there is a problem with prisoners, political prisoners, and judicial harassment in Armenia?
I think it's obvious that there is that Nikol Pashinyan is using both the courts and police and investigative bodies and the National Security Service to harass his political opponents, to create numberless problems for them, for their businesses. And it may seem arbitrary, but it's not. And of course, what he does, these political repressions that he's running, they are conducted in such a way to always leave some space for people maybe not really sure that these are political. For example, he finds for example, someone is charged with selling drugs, which is a very bad thing, right? And so many people say, oh, such a bad person. So by many, it's not considered to be some sort of politically motivated thing. The same, for example, for Chalabian, he was charged for sort of corruption, like he was trying to pay money to students so they take part in protests, etc., etc. But first of all the arguments that the court and the prosecutor was using, it was obvious they were doctored. For example, they published a recording of wiretapping his conversation with a student council member, but it was totally you never hear what was on that recording, what was
and it was edited.
Yes, and the same was with Armenia-Azerbaijan.
Yeah, both of these, and what's interesting about these recordings is that apparently they were done by law enforcement, but they miraculously end up in media that are associated with Pashinyan first.
And there is never any reply when there are no answers for that question. Though you are not the first one to ask that, and surely you won't be the last one. And there are lots of cases like this where they are at least problematic when you come to the legal part, the part of legality of what's done. I've been on many trials, like politically motivated trials, and what I see is like judges refusing to take any objection from the oppositioners, defendants. They refuse. Even like things that are obvious that they are problematic. For example, on Armen Grigoryan's case, who died during a trial, actually, in front of the TV cameras. And even then, the expert from the prosecutor, I mean, there were so many inconsistencies and something that they were obviously against the law. But the judge didn't care. Just they proceeded as if nothing had happened. That's obvious. You just need to go to any of these trials and to see how the defendants are treated, how their arguments are treated.
Yeah, it puts the entire court system's fairness in question in Armenia.
Yeah.
And we actually have a link to the statement from the Armenian Center for Political Rights. It will be linked to our show notes. Although it's in Armenian, I am trying to find the English version to link it to.
The English version, as far as I know, will be published in several hours. So you will have those. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention is that the Armenian Center for Political Rights, from the national forces, or how you call them, or opposition, there hasn't been a systematic effort to create some, lines of defense for human rights, for political rights. And it's good seeing that ACPR, Armenian Center for Political Rights, there is an attempt to create such systematic, probably some institutional effort to counter what's happening now in Armenia. We are sliding into dictatorship, and this is not just political rhetoric, but this is what we are seeing. Of course, the repressions are done like in a smart way. They are like smart bombs. They are very well targeted, very well thought. Many people just don't know about these repressions. They are targeting very small groups of oppositioners to scare them off of protesting, of fighting, etc., but fighting the injustices. But these repressions are becoming more and more widespread.
Well, let me move us to our favorite topic these days, and that is the negotiations and the so-called peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This week, Armen Grigoryan had an interview on Armenian public TV. Here are some of the important points he made. He said, Azerbaijan has been retreating from verbal agreements in the drafts of the so-called peace plan. This appears to be affirmed by Pashinyan in the news. We're putting the links in the show notes. Azerbaijan refuses mirrored withdrawal of the troops from the 1991 borders, and that Russia has not yet given an answer why Artsakh was depopulated. Frankly, I'm not personally sure why Russia has to give that answer, but that's what he said. Meanwhile, Aliyev had a big pre-election press conference earlier this week, mentioning several key points, and we're paraphrasing here. If Armenia doesn't open a corridor without security and custom checks for Azerbaijanis, then Armenia will forever remain a dead end. Aliyev rejected Armen Grigoryan's opinion, saying that Armenia and Azerbaijan do not need guarantors for the peace treaty. He said that if international organizations want to help with border delimitations, they're welcome to do so, but it's not going to be binding on Azerbaijan. Essentially, he's saying thanks, but no thanks. He said that Chermug was theirs and they don't intend to pull back their forces from the region. And he threatened to arrest Artsakh leaders in Yerevan. Then, as the Armenian media was still writing about the speech earlier this week, he held another press conference on Saturday where he openly claimed Yerevan as Azerbaijani territory, saying that it was unjustly taken away from Azerbaijan.
Which never existed back then.
Right, okay. Right, go figure. So I personally think that a lot of this grandstanding on Aliyev's part is for domestic consumption, for his elections to make him look like a macho man. But with this kind of maximalist rhetoric going on, We still hear hopes of a peace treaty from the leaders in Armenia. In reality, how big is the gap between the maximalist demands of Azerbaijan and the actual needs of the sides, Karen?
First of all, I think that Azerbaijan will try to get as much as possible. So their maximalist rhetoric is just about is not getting countered. There is no force to stop him at this point. So he's going to demand anything, like anything from Armenia. There is no limit, like there is no one last point where he's
concession or
yeah,
exactly.
there is. Yeah, I mean, Nikol Pashinyan was promising that if we get rid of Artsakh, everything is going to stop. I mean, the war, the losses, etc. But we all knew that's not true, and Ilham Aliyev proves that it's not true. His maximal program is to get rid of Armenian factor entirely from Armenians, if possible, from Armenian statehood, and if possible, even more, is going to get rid of Armenians once and for all. And he's being backed by Turkey in this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever Nikol Pashinyan told during the last 3 years, I mean, it was obvious that Aliyev is not going to for a compromise. There wasn't any word of a compromise, but Nikol Pashinyan was talking about compromise. And I mean, this is not about not understanding. This is not about, being fool, etc. Nikol Pashinyan isn't fool when it comes to his internal enemies.
Right.
He's keeping his hold on power in Armenia, like doing some genius tricks every day on everyday basis. And that's why I don't believe that this is issue of being immature, being stupid, etc., etc. So what can we see from what he did for the last 3 years, what he has done for the last 3 years, is that Nikol Pashinyan is actually supporting Azerbaijani claims, and he, for several times, he yielded some positions in Armenia of some negotiating positions without getting anything back from Azerbaijan. Like he declared that Karabakh is Azerbaijani without getting anything back. But that was enough for Azerbaijan to start an attack on Artsakh. And Russia said that if you declare Karabakh an Azerbaijani land, how can you demand that we stop Azerbaijan from entering it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's giving away positions, negotiating positions, and actually the real positions on the ground without getting anything. I mean, who negotiates like that? Who claims that we are not going to, after Azerbaijan, you remember in 2021, when Azerbaijan attacked Armenia and went into Armenian territory, like that Sevlich stuff, remember, Black Lake stuff, Ishkhanasar, some heights in Gerrymandering on the border, bordering Sevan, etc. And he said that we are not going to fight, we are just going to negotiate, giving Azerbaijan a precious time to build fortifications there, which made getting them back almost impossible from the military point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of attacking them immediately, they were given time to create fortifications and to do whatever they wanted. How can this be explained if we don't talk about Nikol Pashinyan serving Azerbaijani interests here in Armenia? I mean, I may sound like a conspiracy theorist, yeah, but I mean, are there any other logical explanation for what was going on here with Nikol Pashinyan declarations for the last several years?
Karen, like you said, it's a little difficult to understand the point of continuing the negotiations because both Pashinyan and Aliyev have said that we could break out in violence and war the day after signing this so-called peace treaty. So even if some document is signed, what's the point? What's the meaning of signing something like this? What do you think Pashinyan is thinking in continuing these so-called negotiations?
I can't speak for Pashinyan, but Azerbaijan, first of all, I don't think they want to sign anything because they want to have a carte blanche to continue attacks on Armenian territory and to have some more territorial gains. But even if they sign, it's only going to legitimate what they have captured from Armenia. They will get some legitimacy for what they did, and the other countries would say that you signed it. I mean, we can't protect you if you agree that, for example, Germug is Azerbaijani land.
Karen, you have, I know in the past you have run the RAS Info website. You have a lot of experience analyzing military events and Armenia's and regional security and military issues. Most military analysts we talk to agree that the old Roman saying, "Si vis pacem para bellum," in other words, to prepare for peace, we need to prepare for war, is the theory that we should be pursuing. The only guarantee for peace, in other words, is a high level of military preparedness.
And this is something that Azerbaijanis themselves say, actually.
Okay, so my question actually is, can this theory be wrong? Because what Pashinyan is apparently doing is saying that we must be demonstrably weak in order to have peace. And we know that actually in the past, Levon Ter-Petrosyan has explicitly, I believe, said this. In other words, our military readiness may actually be perceived as a threat to Azerbaijan and therefore increase our insecurity.
Of course, that is exactly what Aliyev says.
Yes. So can you tell us why we should discount this argument?
Let's view this from the Azerbaijani point. Let's say not Armenia, but Azerbaijan. But let's say that if Azerbaijan does not demilitarize its army, then it's a threat and we have to attack it, right? Why Pashinyan never says anything like that?
Yeah.
Why is it Azerbaijan that has the right to dictate should we have an army or not? But the fact that Azerbaijan, which has started several aggressions just in the scope of like 3 years, there has been like 4 or 5 attacks on Karabakh and Armenia, and 2 full-scale wars actually, and one was actually a genocide. In this situation, how come no one says that Azerbaijan should disarm, Azerbaijan should stop its warmongering rhetoric, etc., etc.?
I'm going to be a devil's advocate here and say that many people who protect Pashinyan's sayings here, they say that we should rely on some international community. We should be weak, and when we are weak, then the international community or someone can help us.
Why we should be weak and not Azerbaijan? I mean, why aren't we allowed, at least on the level of rhetorics of declaration, why aren't we allowed to be strong? I mean, what's wrong with us?
Good point. I don't know the answer.
Are we some sort of orphans of international community?
We just don't have the right leadership and government in place.
Okay, so what Azerbaijan is doing is actually saying that you Armenians do not have political rights. You do not have right to have your normal national state, right? Because with a neighbor like Azerbaijan, you can't have a state without having army. Actually, Azerbaijan has territorial problems not only with Armenia, but also with Iran, also with even Russia, even Georgia. They have actually, there has been incursions by Azerbaijani border guards. They have entered some Georgian territory and they don't want to leave. You probably heard of David Gareji Monastery, an ancient Georgian monastery where Azerbaijani border patrols, they created their base there, entering actually, if not Georgian, at least it's a contested territory. I mean, so it is Azerbaijan that conducts aggressive politics against its all neighbors, the same as Turkey actually. This is what Turkey does to all of its neighbors. Turkey is a very dangerous neighbor, and there's zero policy with neighbors. You remember that one, right?
And zero problems with neighbors.
Zero problems, yeah, zero problems with neighbors. It ended
with zero neighbors without problems.
With zero neighbors without problems. Yeah. So, I mean, isn't that absurd that these bullies like Turkey and Azerbaijan, they are talking about us not having right to protect ourselves, not having right to have our own state, etc., etc. I mean, two genocidal states, Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Right. So, okay, you have convinced me, Karen. And then I'm gonna ask you.
It was easy.
Yes. So in this case, if Armenia must prepare militarily in order to ensure some level of peace, is Armenia doing its best to prepare for potential military aggression by Azerbaijan, or to be able to prevent such an aggression?
The problem here is that if we have a government that is serving the interests of our enemies, that means that who is Armenia? When they say Armenia should do this or should do that, what is Armenia? Today, the government of Armenia attacks Armenian church, attacks diaspora organizations, it attacks Artsakhtsis.
It attacks the educational system.
Everything. And even it goes so far that the head of government claims that we shouldn't look at Mountain Ararat, instead we should look at Mountain Aragats. I mean, how can this be an Armenian government? And how can we plan anything or say anything like Armenia should do this or that, having such a government? Look, there are lots of people who just don't want to get involved in political fights. And they say that, okay, we don't understand well what's going on, etc., etc. Let us just do good things for Armenia. For example, let's help refugees. Let's go and dig some trenches, etc. But you go and dig your trenches. Good. What if these trenches are being surrendered by not even some treaty, but some oral agreement? This is not a fantasy. This is something that happened in Munich in December 2020, right?
Yes.
Or, for example, you help refugees. Of course, it's good. Humanitarian help. These people should be helped. I understand that. But while citizens spend their very scarce resources, the government is putting concerts in the Republic Square, spending millions of dollars on holiday lighting, on celebrations, on Snoop Dogg's concert, which even didn't happen. I mean, now you just can't do anything without getting into politics, because whatever you do, even the good things you do, like helping people in need, it helps Nikol Pashinyan to prepare another calamity, another catastrophe. Today we help people from Artsakh. Tomorrow we may need to help people from Munich or from Gerrymandering or wherever. That's why when we speak on, we say, what should Armenia do? I would say, what should Armenians do? And that is get rid of Nikol Pashinyan's regime.
It makes our next question a bit obsolete, but I will ask anyway. We are hearing from Pashinyan's mouth that they are doing military reforms, but we're not seeing the Armenian military anywhere. We haven't heard of any large-scale exercises.
If I remember right, he even actually confirmed that there hasn't been any because they were afraid that Azerbaijan didn't like it. I'm not really sure, but it was something like that.
Can that be considered a good strategy? I mean, what's the point of not, doing that other than maybe I'm asking a redundant question in your opinion, but what's the point, what's the point of having a military if you're not training, if you're not preparing for the obvious things that are gonna happen, that your enemy is explicitly threatening day in and day out?
Yeah, I'm actually very concerned. What is the Armenian military's capacity today? For example, if Aliyev suddenly woke up and decided we're going to take Chermuk or we're going to take Tavush or we're going to take Sunik, is there an Armenian army that can actually stand its ground today?
We may have in some places still, but in general, the overall tendency is towards dismantling the army. And actually, any force that can stand against Azerbaijan. Because, for example, one of the latest news, I don't know, did you notice it? But there was a piece in 168.am, Armenian news website. They found out that the commander of border forces of Armenia, there hasn't been a commander for border forces of Armenia for almost a year. And this is very similar what was done to Armenian army when there wasn't chief of general staff for a very long time. There wasn't chief of the intelligence service of Armenian army for more than a year. There was fast changing of the director of national security service. Like we had 5 directors of national security service in just 2.5 years before 2020 war.
Mm-hmm.
So all these are actually, if you are into political science, this is not something that happened just in Armenia. This is how dictators dismantle institutions that they feel are a threat to them. For example, not having exercises in army is not something that Nikol Pashinyan, invented. It is something you can look at some, lectures online about dictators, and you'll see that this is described as one of the tools they use to weaken the army, which they don't trust, weaken the institutions they don't trust. The same is for what they call it reforms, but they never end. There are always one institution dismantled, connects to the other, joined to the other, merge with the other, then they start merging again and dismantling again, etc. It never ends. And what we have in the end, we have institutions where there are only people appointed by Nikol Pashinyan, and even those public servants who were for putting whom on their places. There was, by constitution, it was they were supposed to be signed on their positions by the president. Even we know the president is a marionette for Nikol Pashinyan, but even with that, he withdraws that forces from the president. The latest change, now the chief of the National Security Service is appointed directly by Pashinyan and not by the president, even this fictional one. So he wants all the power. He collects all the power in his hands. The same he did with the Internal Affairs Ministry. Also, all of the deputy ministers, they are now appointed by Nikol Pashinyan himself. And he created that ministry just to break apart whatever was left from the police and other and the emergency situations. Yeah. So Nikol Pashinyan, what he does is very typical for all the dictators, very typical. They are dismantling institutions that may pose some problem to them, and they are creating new institutions with officials that are personally depend on him, depend on the ruler.
Karen, we had planned to talk a little bit about the rearming of the Armenian military from the French, from the Indians, and talk a little bit about that. But with what you said, perhaps this is all moot given the Pashinyan regime. So let's talk just a little bit about what needs to be done. This is a fairly bleak picture that you've painted for Armenia in 2024. A number of things have been tried by the opposition in the past 3 years to change the foreign policy, the defense and negotiation postures, but these have failed. Why does the opposition keep failing? What needs to be done here going forward to fix the situation?
I think lots of people in opposition still they don't have perception that Nikol Pashinyan is an enemy. He's part of war against Armenia. I mean, still, I still sound like some, crazy conspiracy theory.
Not to me, you don't.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, I would love to have some other explanations, but logical explanations, but I don't have any. So, first of all, the problem is how it's been seen by the opposition, because it requires different strategy, totally different thinking. If you see that you are actually an occupied country, you have an occupation regime. Now, it's not only dictatorship, local dictatorship, but you have some marionette dictatorship. The second thing, it doesn't matter if it's a dictatorship, occupation regime, or what, there are lots of things to learn for the opposition. For opposition, it's still how they see what's going on is mostly like it's just another political fight. This is what their moves, their speakers. I mean, I have the feeling that they consider this to be just another, probably a little bit weird, but still it's same politics as they were back before 2018. And if you understand that you have a dictatorship, the politics change. You can't go with business as usual. You can't, for example, be part of, let's say, tenders, government tenders, and then go and say that, we are occupied and Nikol Pashinyan is a traitor. If Nikol Pashinyan is a traitor, you can't go and take part in government tenders. Or you need to organize people for the fight. This is something that is not happening, unfortunately.
When you say you cannot participate in the government, would you advocate for the opposition to leave the parliament, for example?
In government tenders, if you go and let's say take part in government buying, you get money from the government.
I see.
Of course, that actually what happens now. Political opponents of Nikol Pashinyan, they take part in government
programs.
Yeah, and the next thing they see, there are investigations started against them for appropriating government funds, etc., etc. So whatever profit they may get, they are going to lose their businesses because of that. But they still don't see this as, I mean, you can't go with this the way it was before 2018. And the most important thing, there's a huge work to be done on organizing people, on explaining people on building the necessary infrastructures, starting from human rights defending organizations, ending with mutual help funds, etc., etc. So, because people who go for protests on the street, they are being fired from their works, especially if that's a government work. There are many people being fired because of political reasons, especially recently under the light of Nikol Pashinyan preparing for another extraordinary elections, which is almost visible now. And you need organizations to protect these people, etc., etc. And if opposition doesn't do all this homework, or for example, having good media outlets which can compete, which can put opposition's narratives, which make available opposition narratives to wider groups of people, to larger groups of people. Without all this, you can't win this fight. You can't do anything. And this is what I don't see happening now. That's why I'm very concerned, and I'm afraid that whatever happens next, the opposition will still be unprepared for that.
It seems like you are saying that we are in for, we should be preparing for a very long struggle. We, as in the wider opposition or the wider pro-national forces. So if I can speak for myself, but I just want to give a brief teaser for our listeners about your ideas about rational nationalism, and we'll probably invite you again in the future to do a specific podcast about that. But can you explain in a few sentences what the idea of rational nationalism is, and how is it different than anything else that has been tried today so far?
We have different flavors of nationalism here in Armenia, starting from like ethno-nationalism, etc. And people who, for example, go on a street in Nazi-like, not very many people, like just a few of them, but who try to imitate like some, Nazi movement. But the thing is that what we need now is to have some political nationalism, because this is what Armenian enemies of Armenia, enemies, I mean, this is not abstract. We have Azerbaijan, which doesn't even bother to hide his enmity towards Armenians and Armenia. This is what they are trying to strip us of our political rights, our rights to have nation state, our rights to have a strong state, to have our own to conduct politics as we think is right. And in this situation, we think that, first of all, the only guarantee for Armenians to live on their land as Armenians is to have a strong national state. The second most important thing is that you can't have a state if you do not modernize all the time. Centuries ago, or even in 20th century, you probably could, for example, take a step of modernization and enjoy a relative stability for, let's say, several decades. But now it's not like that. The world is developing with crazy speed. The way the war is waged, the way the education is done. I mean, no one who knew about, let's say, ChatGPT like 3 years ago, who would imagine that there would be just in a matter of years, there lots of professions would become obsolete, etc. So one of the most important thing for Armenia to win, to stay actual, stay modern, we should do everything to modernize. And even now, the problems that we have in our opposition, in our political landscape, Most of them are the problems of not being modernized. So I can say our slogan, our motto is security, modernization, and progress. And all three components of it, all three of them, they are interdependent. You can't have, for example, security if you don't have a modern army. You can't modernize if you don't have security, etc. We are learning a lot, and we think that whatever decisions are going to be made, whatever is going to be done, that should be knowledge-based, technology-driven. But that doesn't mean that we still Armenians, and Armenian national identity together with political identity, not only ethnic identity. That's we should do everything to keep it.
Okay, let's wrap up our topics here. So I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you would like to share. Karen, any thoughts from this past week?
Well, we saw an organized attack against the church and against the Catholicos himself. And it was very well organized with lots of different narratives being thrown and subjects and hot topics being thrown into the media battlefield. And it's still ongoing. Probably this was only in the beginning of Nikol Pashinyan's rule. There was something close to it when there was that movement I would call a fake movement called Nor Hayastan Nor Hayrapet. You probably remember that one.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
this week, it was, this passing week, it was put again in use. They just woke up, started writing, and already Nikol Pashinyan funds were identified are being active in that campaign against Vehapar and against the church in general. So this was probably the biggest topic. And there were also some topics which were thrown into the field just to take the attention away from what was going on. Because not allowing Catholicos to speak on New Year Eve was considered, there was lots of dissatisfaction, because of that. So it was used to attack Catholicos and to distract from the fact that he wasn't allowed to speak. By the way, if you notice that some opposition MPs told that not allowing talk about Artsakh was probably part of that agreement that is being forced upon Armenia.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and not allowing Catholicos' speech to be broadcasted on public TV was actually part of that agreement, which is not signed, but Nikol Pashinyan already is trying to implement it. That's another very worrying signal.
Okay. Hovig, what's on your mind?
Sadly, this week we heard news of non-combat deaths in the army. First, we had a case where a conscript shot his officer and then proceeded to kill himself. We had another case where an officer committed suicide, potentially, I think, due to gambling problems. We had another case just today where, unfortunately, a conscript who was on his last day of service, about to be discharged after serving for 24 months, was killed in an avalanche. So Pashinyan is going around regions of Armenia, firing people for obscenely ridiculous things, such as a missing or a improperly installed clothing hanger, and other ridiculous things like that. But no one has been so far fired for creating the conditions where these types of incidents appear to happen more frequently than many times in the past. And people just, we could remember when in the past, when even any one of these incidents itself would create a huge, reverberation in the public, as it should. But somehow Pashinyan is able to keep the media quiet. And meanwhile, Suren Papikyan, one of Pashinyan's favorite ministers, and the one who should be responsible for the conditions that led to these deaths, is safely holding on to his job. And I'm pretty sure that he will survive without a scratch.
Hovik, I would not be surprised if Pashinyan spins this as a huge improvement over last January when he lost 15 soldiers in that terrible fire in Azad, remember?
Yeah, that's
so
dark
this year
humor,
he
but
has only lost
yeah.
3, and last year it was 15, so much improved. That's the kind of PR that he has.
Unfortunately, this is a 1-year anniversary of the events in Azad village about a year ago, or almost 1 year.
Right.
And
that's
still,
this coming Friday is the anniversary, January 19.
Yes, you are right.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Karen.
That was our show recorded on January 14, 2024. We've been talking with Karen Vrtanesyan, former coordinator of Razminfo, a specialty website on military news and analysis with a focus on Armenia and its neighboring region. I'm Asbet Bedrosyan.
And this is Hovik Manucharyan.
Please find us on social media and follow us everywhere you get your Armenian news. The links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.